go. And welcome to Architectural Acoustics. A good number of you. I'm not quite aware how many there should be. I'm not really fussed. I'm Zach. And I hope to entertain you quite a bit and essentially provoke thinking processes. So it'll be potentially slightly unusual, my lectures. We'll see about that. But typically I avoid giving instructions that need to be completed. I think taking instructions is something that AI does for us really well already, and very soon it will do it even better. So think about, what are the things that will get you employed? Probably things that AI won't do for us. And typically taking instruction isn't one of those. So what I'll definitely try to do is I'll try to provoke thinking processes, okay? Coming to your own conclusions based on some premises. So the module is quite technical. It has evolved in the past years since I've been doing it, such that it has become more practical. So actually we will have a bit of a balance, almost a 50-50 balance between practical stuff and theoretical stuff. So it should be all very enjoyable and quite great. So what am I after in terms of, doing this with you guys? Definitely we're gonna try to dig into, the things that are really top-notch. The interesting thing about acoustics is that approaching it, you would think, well, that's the exact science and, it has all the answers. But if you look through some of the books that I've recommended as a reading list, which are available on UWE libraries, if you look at some of those books, you will realize that there are acousticians who have been in the trade for many decades and with a physics background, and they come out at the other end saying, actually, we cannot predict stuff much at all. Okay, so it is a very interesting journey to go through this. Obviously, we won't go through this in a semester in terms of getting to all the details in terms of the tech. But indeed, we will take the approach of a music tech enthusiast who really wants to have some foundation for the things that we essentially learn from practice. So hopefully it will be a kind of a balanced journey and, hopefully a lot of facts, some debunking and stuff like this will happen as well. So feel free to ask away. Typically I have slideshows for every lecture, but I'm not really fussed about following those. I really enjoy making a kind of an interesting story around things, and many anecdotes come to mind, and I'll be talking about irrelevant stuff as well. So, the more you can make it a dialogue, the better. In the sense that, things might have interested you for a while and you might not have found the right resources. So one of the things that I find quite crucial is that lexical knowledge, meaning information, is not as crucial anymore. Okay, back in the previous century, you study in order to know the facts. This is passé. We don't really need to know the facts. The facts are, however much a SIM card costs per month. That's, So that's another way to think about, employability in the future. If it's something that AI can do, then it costs the same as a SIM card per month. So that's not a huge wage to make a living. So what I'll be really interested in trying to stimulate is the understanding of credibility. Okay, credibility of sources is so much more important than the facts these days. And how do we get there? How do we understand the credibility, the accuracy of a source? Be it a website, be it a book, be it a paper. So we used to have the situation whereby, most books, stuff that is published on a paper has been thoroughly checked for bullshit. However, it's it comes through more and more, especially in papers. You will see a lot of things that are problematic. So the point is that there is a way to recognize the credibility of the source without knowing the answer to the question you're looking for. Can you hear me in the back? Yeah? Is that all right? Yeah, please. If you can do the sawing outside, that's much better. So this kind of recognition of credibility has a lot to do with where things come from. All right? So if it's someone looking cool on YouTube, you might have suspicions. But actually, it also has to do with terminology. Okay, so I will actually it's almost half of what I'm really trying to transmit is the ability to talk accurately about technical detail in acoustics, in sound. Okay, there's a lot of keywords that we tend to throw around and think that these sentences we produce might be accurate, unambiguous, but most often they are not. So that will be one of the crucial things, like, sound having frequencies. This guitar has those frequencies. Those are actually weak terms. I'll get to those things as we progress. But that I think is really the crucial thing. That's the thing that gets you the job, if you ask me. If you're in an interview and you use the right terms, it really does get you the job very often. Because typically these days, you're probably aware, you are normally trained for the job that you applied for when you're accepted. This didn't used to be like this. Normally, I've got a diploma of a sound engineer, you can immediately go to the main desk and do your thing. But it's not happening anymore. So typically, it's not even that what you learn here will be necessarily crucial in the future. But actually, the thing is that the facts are there already, so I don't really need to tell you all the facts. I need to tell you what there is to know. That's a really interesting kind of twist of culture that is happening. In a way, I don't really need to know all the details about building a mastering studio shed. But if I know all the people that need to be involved, all the experts, and I approximately know what kind of expertise they have, you see, I'm kind of knowing the thing without knowing the details. And so that's really crucial to be able to map the knowledge, to understand all the things that are out there that could be known to a certain degree of accuracy. So that's really the kind of the ideas that I'm having in terms of how this is truly helpful. But actually, it's also going to be truly helpful with the practicals. So we have, I'm going to talk in some detail about that as well. Let's see if I have missed here anything. So equations, how many people love numbers and mathematics? Yay! Well, there's a few hands. It used to be a big part of this module, less so recently. So we're not really pushing it. But there are a few things in terms of proportion, inverse proportion. Even without needing to use the equations in kind of a crucial performance setting. Understanding these things, having a general idea what there is to know, what you could actually derive from looking at an equation. It can be really valuable. But the accent is definitely not on those. So expression, yes, and practical abilities. So let's jump to assessment. I'll talk briefly about what it is. It's kind of undergoing internal scrutiny right now, but I don't expect many things to change. So I'll just present you the current draft. So what I have in terms of assessment here is portfolio of measurements. And what we do, this date might not be accurate yet, but in any case, it's going to happen, I think, in the second week of January. So the way this looks is that we have Monday sessions, as you're probably aware, up until mid-December. And there is a week off for this module as well. So in total, we will have 10 real sessions. This is the intro. It's the 0th session. I don't count this one. And actually, out of those 10, I will probably be doing the first 7. Then they're going to transport me to China to do some UWE teaching there. And there will be someone covering. Normally, what I had anyway is the last 2 weeks done by Mac Acoustics people. It's one of the few biggest companies for acoustical consultancy in Bristol. They're local. About half of their staff are ex-UWE students. We have really tight connections with these people, and they often come around and, already in the 3rd year, they seek out people who are really up for that kind of thing. So they typically deliver last 2 sessions, which are in line with industry. So that's that. And then the 7th session, we'll still kind of seeing what's going to happen. Probably Bruce will do it. You probably met Bruce by now. We'll see. Someone will jump in there. So what it is, well, essentially I have 3 tasks, 3 measurement tasks, and you pick 2 out of 3. And they're supposed to be the kind of things that you might find exciting, at least the second one is, which is optimization of speaker placements in a control room, using measurement and using audition. So I guess everyone has a kind of a pair of near fields. By the way, terminology, acousticians hate it when you say near field for a monitor, because near field is a term used in acoustics and it has been in use much earlier, and it describes the distance from a radiating source. The fact is that in acoustics, I won't go too deep into this, but if you're very near a radiating source, then most of the equations don't hold. And that's what they call the near field. So if you are getting an acoustician's job, you say close field monitor, you might be in already, which is a funny thing. So optimization of speaker placement. So something you probably want to do in your room, potentially your little studio. Something that we're probably going to be doing the pretty much the same task in the practicals. Okay, so there are some instructions there, but actually to really excel, you would have to go further than the instructions. But on top of that, we're going to pretty much do these exercises in groups in class. Okay, I'm still unsure how well this will work. I think we should have about 6-7 kits, which consist of measurement microphones and sound cards and small active speakers, such that we can measure around different studios, different rooms, and things like that. So essentially, the balance will be first half of the classes will be theory, second half will be practicals, and a lot of practicals will look a lot like the assessment. Okay, so you might have gathered it already. The policy of the university increasingly sounds like, well, it should be fairly easy to pass. So it's probably fairly easy to pass, but to really get a first, I really want you to dig deep. And most of all, dig on your own. So it is a matter of fact, if you feel like becoming a scientist or something in the vicinity of, you have to love paperback, hardback books. It's just, the screens won't motivate you for long enough to keep reading. Things are popping up. You can't even switch off all the notifications anymore. It's horrible. Actually, I actually have myself a proper A4 kind of digital paper reader, because it allows me to have dozens and dozens of books and scroll through them quite quickly, and it reads quite well in dim light, in bed, in the evening. It is just a matter of fact. There is never enough YouTube lectures, although there's tons. There's never enough time in these classes for you to really go deep. If you feel like I'm that kind of person, I'm going to go really deep, you just have to get these books. Okay, get them, if you pay 20, 30 quid for one of these, even better, because, you value it as an object, you can take it places, and, that's what science still is, you just have to read through a few thousand pages. If you really want to, claim, okay, I know my acoustics, even without the equations, it's a few thousand pages just to get it going. And it's really nice because it actually connects all the dots. It connects so many dots. It's really cathartic to study acoustics. There is a lot of links to instrument recording investigation. I used to do the acoustics bit there as well. Who knows, maybe I'll do a lecture as well. To truly understand what's going on, what you can expect from these systems, from instruments, from recording environments, all these things. It's just beautiful. But yes, indeed, you can just say, well, forget the books. I haven't read much so far, and I'm not planning to. That's not an issue. Grab the measurement microphones. So that's why we're having this balance. You can kind of choose your thing, what you go with. So, maybe I'll just introduce the 3 tasks rather than talk in any detail. We'll talk more detail when we get to the topics. So first one or second one is optimization of speaker placement in a control room. First one is examination of transmission properties between spaces. Okay, this is a slightly simpler one to do if you are a bit worried about measurement microphones, sound cards, active speakers, positioning things. This is probably the one that requires the least hands-on, because the only thing you need is the SPL meter. Nevertheless, there are a few things to do. You can do this also in one of our studios, teaching rooms. You can do it at home. So all of these things are designed to be flexible like that. This year, actually for the first time, we used to use the software called Fuzz Measure that you might be aware of, which is a strictly Mac software. It's recently purchased by Rode Microphones, and it's beautiful because it's straight out of the box, does the thing, and gives you beautiful graphs. The issue is that the licensing is not very flexible. So this year I have chosen to go with the software called EQ Room Wizard, which is a legacy ancient thing, started about 20 years ago. But it's really professional as well, regardless the fact that it's free. So it actually allows you to install it on your laptop and get going on your own, which should be a breeze, something that last year wasn't possible. If everything is right, I still have to check all the computers in all our rooms should have Room EQ Wizard, and it can become your, tool for many things, hopefully. I mean, I understand that there is potentially little interest in hardware these days, but actually most of the methods we will utilize for acoustic measurement can be used for measuring hardware equipment as well, gear. Take a compressor, take this desk, figure out what's the noise floor, figure out what are the distortion characteristics. Take, some friend says, well, I've done my mastering on this tape machine, what do you think about this? And say, well, I'll just bring my gear and then I'll tell you what I think about this, and then you measure the transmission of his tape deck, whatever. So actually it goes broader than just acoustic measurement. It goes into all sorts of measurement in terms of audio tech. So if you are potentially interested in the electronic side of things, then a lot of this stuff will be relevant. Okay, so the transmission here, what's going to be interesting? Well, maybe it's worth just saying what we are getting at. So here, actually, the interesting thing is, Well, there's not much that's horribly interesting with this one. It's kind of the introductory one, the basic one. In any case, it has to do with averaging. So here probably the trick is how you do your averaging. And essentially the understanding of how level drops with distance. You know, so here typically, I mean, I should probably talk about this later on, but I love to say the interesting things ahead and then finish early and never get to the basics. So I'll have to trust you to stop me and like, okay, listen, can you please explain that? I tend to assume that you are all just genius, you know, to start with, and, you know, I hope it... I mean, it's supposed to serve you in terms of motivating you, but if I just go off-piste, you have to ask me to slow down. So yeah, here the averaging is interesting thing. I mean, one of the interesting things is the symmetry of transmission. Okay, it's a kind of hot potatoes. I'm not sure what it means when someone says hot potatoes. Or a can of worms, is that a similar... I mean, you reckon you got it by now. English is not my first language, so I kind of trash it a bit here and there. But in terms of the symmetry of transmission, it's quite interesting, especially these days. So, I mean, we're going to talk a lot about established stuff pertinent to music tech, but actually one of the research directions recently is asymmetrical transmission. And the funny thing is that there are certain special kinds of perforation in special kinds of material that can produce this effect. So actually, as far as the acoustics goes, we currently have a really strong current of research that is nearby, you know, nearing, bordering material technologies. Okay, because of that part of engineering is booming, it's exploding. And actually there is a huge potential also to combine it with biomaterials. In fact, we have a research group of unconventional computing here at UWE. And in fact, I've done some things with them as well. Believe it or not, I've made the cheapest passive summing mixer you can imagine from aloe vera leaves. You can do it. You can actually stick your signal into an aloe vera leaf and it comes through. And if it's still wet and a kind of a decent thickness leaf, then the transmission is as good as, you know, total hi-fi, hardly noticeable. And then as it starts to dry, you get, you know, hard rock, you get punk, you get harsh noise, you know, you get a gradation of of noise. So there's a lot of things you can do potentially with acoustics and some really new tech coming out. I mean, you're probably aware that we are still kind of stuck with very thick bass traps. That's something that might change thanks to new materials. I mean, we already have dead sheet. I don't know if you've heard of this term. Acousticians like to use it when they have to save space. But you know, there is a huge amount of things that are happening with new materials. Also, for example, with, I mean, part of this will be architectural acoustics, although we kind of focus on music tech relevant stuff. But interesting fact, that was about 15 years ago, I've worked a bit on a research project with passive ventilation. So one of the interesting things you can do is you can have a ventilation duct, something like this, and then you can insert damping foam at certain distances of certain thickness, and thereby you will control the spectral characteristic of absorption. So what you can actually do is you can tune your ventilation duct to exclude the most disturbing noise source that is coming through. For example, millions of interesting things happening at the forefront of science. So I easily imagine at least a few of you will, end up somewhere in that department. Okay, so we had the SPL transmission characteristic, can be interesting, can be worthwhile. Optimization of speaker placement, to me that seems to be the most kind of, I definitely want to do that. And then the third option is specifying the suitability of a large space for music and lecturing. So kind of examining larger spaces. So with these three things, we are kind of covering the basics of acoustics and then some really important applications, practical side of things. And here I have some interesting things, a bit more stuff like, I believe, spectral characteristic of reverberation, things like this, clarity, which is a unit, something we measure in acoustics, and so on. Okay, so that's the assessment brief. In essence, so it is a portfolio of three things. The sooner you start, the better. If you are already doing it while we are doing practicals on this topic, that means that you can directly answer a question, directly get an answer, and get on with it. You can also do the group session, the practical session, where we do something similar first, just to get a feel of how it goes, and then I would actually suggest go back home and do it, do your own. Because if you're doing it while it's fresh, while it's actual, you'll be done before Christmas, and it's gonna serve you well, I would think. And if you get stuck with anything, or even better, if you get truly motivated and say, well, actually, this thing with clarity, there is something really great about this, something fishy, I really need to study this, then you can take the actual book on your Christmas holidays and really study it and then go really, really far with it. Oh, you're looking at my visa. Bloody hell. I didn't plan that. Okay, so that's briefly about the assessment. I mean, essentially, this is the balance of things. So I'm going to try to evaluate your understanding of the topics, which is not evaluating the accuracy of the document. These two things, unfortunately, tend to be slightly different. So I do my best to, even if you produce inaccurate statements, which is likely to be the case, if you really, examine things thoroughly, even then I will, try to read between the lines and see how much you understand, rather than be like, okay, wrong statement, inaccurate, ambiguous, red. I will try to help you develop this ability of accurately expressing tech stuff, just to counterbalance the first half of the sentence. But I will try to really get at, how much you actually understand. Results, that is the accuracy of what you do. Okay, so I'm going to try to make a slight distinction there. And here you have my general, stuff. You can probably read through this. And then the presentation. I mean, typically I'm the kind of guy who doesn't really care about formalities at all. I'm thoroughly disturbed by, awarding degrees for following formalities and following instructions. However, I'm in great minority among my colleagues, so you can probably get everything you want just by doing what you're told. But it just won't impress me. I'm one of those. They're still keeping me around. It means that they have a charm for this side of, this way of thinking as well. But it might not last. We'll see. We'll see about that. So in any case, you will get awarded stuff for, formalities, presentation, how it all looks, numbering the figures, accurate UWE Harvard referencing and all the rest of that. Okay, so that's what you may expect. Again, the main advice here is start early. Okay, the sooner you start, the better. Now, in terms of the reading list, I'm going to admit that I didn't double check this link just now. So I might as well. And it seems that it does work. So let's briefly observe. I should say a few things about, here we have normally they just copy over the reading list from last year, and it looks like they've done it well. So there are a lot of books. Okay, what I've done here is I've taken the more important ones, the more generic ones up front. So typically, if you are interested in more the architectural, technical side of things, you know, you prefer to be an engineer than an artist. By the way, this is an interesting thing just to get to know you guys as well. Engineers, who feels like being an engineer? Hands in the air. Not quite half of you. And artists? Well, okay, so that's about half in terms of people who seem to have decided for themselves. I think it's great. I mean, to me, the crossroads between tech and art is the most beautiful thing you can choose to do in life. You know, because on every day you have something to do. You know, you can be, you know, really clever and focused one day and do your tech stuff, and the other day you can be wasted or just in a very deep mood or very high mood, whatever you get to, and be really expressive and explore the soul and the brain and the soul and the brain. It's just beautiful, you know, it goes from both ways. I don't have there is some arts considerations here, but you understand this is a fairly technical module. However, if any of you are into progressive art, into harsh noise, odd meters, really weird music, you know, I want to be your friend as well and just play me your stuff. I do a lot of that. In fact, if you're following any of the music modules and doing compositions, I used to do that as well before they started sending me Far East as a matter of preference. Who knows why? If you are doing those modules, feel free to come to me and be like, have a listen to my track, you know, trash it. That's what I typically like to do, you know. I'm not the kind of, oh, that's a lovely track. That's unlikely to be my comment. But some of you may be interested in, you know, something which is a bit more critical or just rude. You know, knock on my door, send me an email, talk to me after class. I'm all into that kind of stuff as well. Also, by the way, as a matter of introduction, I mean, you've probably seen my profile on the FYP class earlier this week. But indeed, I'm really into digital signal processing as well. Kind of designing audio effects, programming audio effects, that kind of stuff. And weird synthesis, modular stuff. Although I have to say that I've spent about 2 and a bit decades, well, actually just about 2, because I've stopped for a while now, with really exploring the imagination. I was totally, you know, it's like I can imagine horribly weird things and I want to see them happen. And I spent decades with this and they did happen. So now I'm through with this. And I'm not really interested in making music that is, you know, gonna happen tomorrow, so to speak. You know, just sat in the studio with speakers and be like, okay, well, this is great. I'm gonna spend another 1,000 hours with this and blah, blah. I've done that many times, made a few horribly weird albums like that. But I'm through with it. I'm not really interested in that anymore. In fact, what I'm interested, maybe some of you guys will be, you know, motivated, who knows. I used to run a thing called Noise Lab, but that doesn't happen either anymore in terms of, you know, more informal type of class with Center for Music. But actually, I've been thinking about this because, you see, it's very curious that most of the really cool party music, you know, like dance music that we hear, I guess most of you go out and, you know, move your body to some kind of music. The interesting thing is that the electronic ones, at least, are mostly done by a single person locked up in a studio somewhere and probably high on coffee or whatever they prefer. and it's supposed to be a social thing. So there's a really interesting discrepancy there, if you see what I mean. So I'm on my own in my little studio, and I'm trying to get to the really amazing party mood that I know is lingering somewhere inside me, and I'm pushing it on my own. And then it actually goes out there the next day, the next month. It's in the club, and the people get to enjoy it. So what I've been thinking about is a kind of cycling team method. You know how cycling teams race? They have a forerunner. So typically they have one person in the team who sets the tempo for the whole team and runs up front. And also what happens if you're riding in the shadow of another vehicle, you don't have to push as much. The kind of wind takes you along, so to speak. So typically the way the cyclists run a team race is that for the 80% of the time, the forerunner is just setting the tempo, which is a good tempo. It's not exhausting, but it allows all the people in the back to go along without paying too much attention. And then in the last 20% of the race, then all the guys from the back, they start sprinting. So I was thinking about something similar for making dance music in a studio. It's like having one guy at the desk, in charge and pushing. It's like, okay, guys, how do you like this kick? Okay, this kick is shit, evidently. How could you ask such a stupid question, So you have a bunch of guys in the back really, pushing him, poking him, but he's supposed to be the forerunner. And then this lasts until someone in the back says, get out, now I'm going to do this, like tear the mouse out of his hand. And then all the guys in the back, before the race finishes, before the track is finished, then everyone, gets to, do the thing as well. And this is also an idea. I've heard the interview with Beatles, and they said that the policy was when we go into the studio, we don't come out before the track is finished. So if it takes 3 hours, that's an easy one. If it takes 8 hours, we're there. We're not coming out of the studio before it's finished. So just to give you a bit of a, idea on some other things that I'm really interested in aside of acoustics and this kind of teamwork music making, I think there's a lot of potential there because it seems a discrepancy. Okay, back to the reading list. So the first one, Acoustics and Noise Control, is a bit more engineering, and Master Handbook of Acoustics, it's a bit more sciencey, if that's a distinction. Have a look. Actually, what I normally do, I have it in my office. I have a printout of all the tables of contents of the books that I find quite important. So this means that I have, maybe 30, 40 books in one book, and it's just the table of contents. And sometimes I read the tables of contents. Just to know, okay, in this book it's a bit more like this, there is a chapter of this in this book. Those are the things that really help you. I used to say also, if I ask a tricky question, I probably will, if you can look up the answer and interpret it and, be on time, that's a great answer. You don't need to know it by heart. You need to understand the question, quickly assess the credibility of the source, quickly read the source, and contextualize what you've read. And if you can do this really quickly, that's probably the best thing you can do. Because if you rely on remembering facts, I shouldn't say bad things about remembering facts, but typically what I prefer to do is remember the way to come to the conclusion, rather than remember the conclusion. Because it keeps the mind trained, it keeps the mind active. So actually, some of the equations I will show, you will notice that I'm interpreting it as I look at it. I don't remember the description that explains the equation. I'll have to fight it, and I like to do it. It's kind of immediate, it happens, it's a bit like improv, it's a bit like music. rather than just, okay, answer, response, wrong, right, all of these things. Okay, so that's, so you see all of these books pretty much are available online, except this one. So, you can just use your existing tech to do this. Actually, most of these are found in PDFs online in weird places as well. But in any case, you can start online. Now, acoustic and psychoacoustics. Psychoacoustics is a hugely interesting science. Most people have little clue about how huge it is. I'm pretty sure I could probably run a whole bachelor course on psychoacoustics. By the time you've connected all the dots with signal processing, with neurology, with psychology, with music therapy, it's huge. Unfortunately, there is no room for psychoacoustics BSc on top of the one you're doing now. And I will have one class on psychoacoustics, but I will give you some really interesting resources. The interesting thing is that psychoacoustics also has a really big explosion currently, because the tech for monitoring the brain is amazing these days, and it's improving as we speak. So the fact is that the neurological mechanisms behind hearing are still not clear. Okay, it's hugely complex. Interesting thing to note might be that for audition, we have more layers than for vision, but for vision we have more neurons. So it's a funny thing to note that audition does seem to be more complex. In fact, the most complex perceptual faculty. So it's hugely interesting. This book, Howard Angus, is a kind of an entry-level text. So the first two books are heavy, hardcore, skipping equations, skipping stuff, just getting to the things that may be interesting, really. Acoustic psychoacoustics is a bit of an entry level. So if you feel like, actually reading through, if you're into, just spending time, it might be a good idea to take an entry level book. If you're like, okay, well, I think I know everything. That's how I started. I hardly got my degree. I was very convinced that I knew everything there is to know. So if you're a bit like that, take a heavy duty book and actually realize all the things that you don't know, and you will feel relieved because now you know what you don't know. So it's another affirmative outcome like that. Now, Oralization by Forlander, it's a newer book, and it has a lot of interesting open questions. Okay, so if you're thinking like, okay, well, I'm sick of producing EDM and it's not that much fun anyway, it might be that after a few years you're at this point and you really feel like becoming a tech expert. This Forlander book is actually kind of outward looking, into the future, where it all may go. So it might be very inspiring if you think there is a future for you in this domain. Zwicker, Psychoacoustics, this is a deep psychoacoustics book. So if you think you're interested in neurology, and although neurology is a kind of the newer thing here, psychoacoustics, the traditional psychoacoustics, are all about hearing thresholds. Measuring, averaging on population, and claiming things about what you do hear, what you do not hear, and things like this. Standards online, this will be helpful if you complete the assignment thoroughly. Or one of them at least asks you to look up some standard numbers. Okay, and then come the more practical things. So this is all kind of theory-heavy stuff, the first subgroup. And the second one is studio-orientated. So I kind of imagine most of you are keen on that. Room acoustics, recording studio design, acoustic absorbers and diffusers. if you go through these book and read just interesting stuff, you're probably, way ahead of the level that we aim at in this short course. We understand 10 classes isn't too much. So in pretty much every aspect, you will get more from going through these things. Newell's book is more practical. Okay, that's actually something I would definitely recommend. Just get this book printed, get a PDF, read this book. It's great. It really tells you so many things. And he's the guy who has done it for a few decades before he started teaching it and writing about it. He's got a lot of interesting details, anecdotes, things to share. So that would probably be the book. If you say, well, okay, I'm not going to go through 10 books that you've just recommended. I'm going to check out one book. Let this be the book you check out, okay? Newell's Recording Studio Design. Room Acoustics, as it says, it's, as expected, a bit more technical, but it is pertinent to studio design, evidently. And then the most practical thing, acoustic absorbers and diffusers. It's just one of those things, you have to love it, you have to build them. One of the things that seems still a bit underexplored is kind of recycling-based studio design. Okay, so you have all these things that you can buy for a whole lot of cash in terms of absorption and diffusion. But actually, I'm an eBay addict. I don't know if there's anyone like me. I'm not going to tell you what's on tonight. Ask me on Monday. Maybe I'll have bought it by then. Extremely exciting. I'm not sharing it. But in any case, if you enter eBay with job lot as a search term, it's a good idea if you're into this kind of stuff, if you have a shed or dad has a shed, or you can, put some things together. In fact, I'm still not sure what's happening this year, but there's a whole lot of unused space that you're aware of. I've tried to ask Max to, let me put in a drum kit and a pair of speakers and kind of a social area, a drink after teaching and all the rest. But it didn't quite get there. We'll see. Maybe we'll manage to occupy one of these rooms. But in any case, building stuff for studios is a lovely thing. I love to do it, build studios and stuff. And actually, absorption is not high tech. You need porous materials, and diffusion is not very high tech either. You need random surfaces. So you can do this with pretty much everything. But in any case, it's an amazing book to study, the high-tech, top-notch absorbers and diffusers. Okay, so that's the studio. Now, this set of books, these three, are about concert halls. This used to be traditionally the main thing for acousticians. Concert hall design, many books written about it in the previous century, many recipes and many rejections of different recipes, many failures, many unexpected successes. It's a really a funny thing. The issue is that, to really appreciate this, you have to have spent, I shouldn't say 1,000, but it probably should say 1,000, but at least 100 hours in proper concert halls. It's part of the psychoacoustics. I will mention that. But you see, if you ask me whether a piano recording sounds realistic or not, the fact is that I can't tell you. I mean, I've heard amazing pianos in great concert halls maybe a dozen times in my life, and I've heard it 2,000-3,000 times on amazing speakers in great studios. So you see, it's interesting to note that your reference is what you've done so far. So if you don't have great experience with acoustic instruments, then you don't really know what they are. If you don't have great experience with concert halls, reading too much about it is just a bunch of stories, really. However, I do expect that you have more experience with control rooms, speakers, headphones, things like this. So, just make sure that, that's in a way where the practice really hits, right? To really know what you're dealing with. So even though concert hall acoustics is a huge part of acoustics and architectural acoustics, we're not gonna do too much about it. I think I have one lecture on this. But if you're interested, there's amazing stories in the history of designing things, and there is some jobs in there as well. I mean, typically, acousticians need to sign off pretty much everything that's being built. And you will learn from Mac Acoustics, our friends there, that's what they do, and they get a whole lot of cash for doing it. So it's a kind of a definite career opportunity. There is very little career in designing concert halls, as you might, guess. They're closing down more so than opening. It's a bit passé, but nevertheless hugely interesting stuff. Just don't watch movies and series, get these books, read them. Trust me, it's beautiful. Okay, and then the last block of books is architectural acoustics. Okay, so that's where, you get into the domain of working alongside architects and really knowing the ins and outs of the acoustic performance of different building materials, different methods, types of buildings. But it's also great if you have the opportunity to build your own shed. If you want a really clean mastering suite, probably everyone does. It's a really tricky thing to build into an existing building, especially if it is made of stone, brick, and all the rest. Actually, what you really want is a wooden shed. Because, you see, that's part of the things that I hope will give you a sense of catharsis, is that, if you want to, if the sound travels away from you, right, there is typically three things that can happen. One is it reflects, the other is it gets absorbed, it becomes heat, and the third one, it gets transmitted. So most of the issues we have with studios is the reflection. Everything that comes back into the room interferes with the original sounds, gives you your comp filter effects, gives you your room modes, all the rest. So actually one of the easiest things, it's much easier to let the sound pass through to transmit it away than to absorb it. See, normally you would think like, okay, well, I really need to absorb a lot of sound. But that is the case if you have a neighbor, right? So the best thing is wooden sheds in the forest, if you ask me. Although I've seen, my good friend has built one just in Amsterdam in the back of a, 6-story building. He had the garden. People normally had bike sheds. He put a mastering suite there. Works well. So if you're into this, building sheds, the last book there, Construction of Houses, is really cool. You can almost just build a little shed using this book. But then the first two are obviously a bit more technical and, the kind of thing that acousticians really need to know. But as I said, even if someone from Mac Acoustics picks you to, give you a job as soon as you graduate because you're so genius with acoustics, they will teach you everything. And the first few months you will just answer emails, and then you will, assist on a project. It will take a few years before you run a project. So you understand that, in a way you're free. You're free to become, a charming interviewee, when you get the chance that you don't, have confidence issues, and that you have the vocabulary, that you have the eloquence, even if your accent is horrible, you still may be able to talk accurately. So those are the things that really help, I would think. Okay, so books. Guys, I will try to entertain you, charm you, say bullshit, have a pint after the class, all the rest. But if you really want to learn this, there it is. That's the way. And it's beautiful, actually. Some of these books are really well written as well. Okay, quickly now, last 4 minutes. For the rest, I typically do this. Learning outcomes. This is what the module aims to do. Read it. It's great. Now, this is a very important slide. I will upload this one to Blackboard, which will be the platform where all the videos go and all the rest. It will become alive this weekend. This is a great one. So these are my lecture titles, my chapters. And there are some topics. I mean, if you're thinking, by the way, of a final year project and you feel like a techie person in this domain, talk to me already. Okay? Here are actually some topics that might be really interesting for final year projects as well. I used to have an exam for this module and there was a graph table reading, but I kind of left it in there because it highlights the important things. It actually highlights the keywords that are unfamiliar. See, I think that's one of the key things. If I manage to repeat an unfamiliar word 5 times in a lecture, it's going to stick, the fact that it's unfamiliar, and it's going to hopefully make you want to understand it. So I will use these terms. I will say attenuation 1,000,000 times, and acquire it. Use the word attenuation. These are the things that really make you, a graduate in this domain. But the really interesting thing for us here is further research topics. So there's a lot of ahead-looking stuff here. But the really good thing here is that I have a list of book chapters that relate to each week. So I don't imagine anyone will be such an amazing, student to read the chapter before the class. But if you do, it might be great because then you can pick on me for saying something inaccurately. By the way, don't trust what I say. Okay? This is not a temple. This is not a religious ceremony. I do not need you to trust and believe what I say. I need you to develop your skeptical mindset, right? You have to verify what I say. And especially it does get tricky because I tend to provoke with exaggerating. It's my favorite way of communicating. I come from the Balkans. This is how we operate. We provoke each other and we exaggerate. So that's what I'm going to keep doing. So it should serve you well, I would think, to actually get the thinking processes going rather than memorizing or remembering. Okay, so for tomorrow, which is Monday, because the weekend is one day for everyone, I guess no one sleeps in the weekends. So tomorrow, I'll start a bit with this, just a basic equation understanding. But actually, I have 2 things. I will talk briefly about this. Decibels. It's the first big thing, and I will spend some time with it. But I will start with asking you guys about decibels. So if you have a funny anecdote about decibels, I have a few. Or, or a question or some kind of understanding, because what I will also attempt to do is build on what you already know. Okay, so, and you will have to be honest, because if you're not, I'm just gonna fly away and, it will be difficult to meet. So you have to make sure that you make me aware of the things that are crucially difficult to understand or indeed ambiguous. And decibels is pretty much the first main thing like that. So I'm going to spend some time that, but also with bit of musical intervals. Okay? So if anyone wants to do a short presentation on decibels and musical intervals, like here is what I found, it can be a great exercise for your confidence, for me to have a challenge of scrutinizing it. Okay, so one last thing, I'm completely convinced that each one of you, each one of us, we are angels. I actually don't believe there is evil. something to contest, by the way. So everything you express which has to do with the self, with your emotion, with how you feel, I believe it. If you say, listen, Zach, I'm just so hungover, I'll see you next time, I'll be like, no worries. But if you say something which is supposed to be an accurate statement, I'm gonna poke at you like no one. I'll be the most skeptical person. It's my job. You know, so I really like to make this distinction, and that's why I also promote, and I've asked, you know, if anyone's, we can go to SU, grab a pint, meet each other, and all the rest. Because, you know, the emotional trust is really important, but the cognitive distrust is potentially even more important. You know, find a way to really trust each other like people, but as soon as you say something, I can maybe make it more accurate, maybe it's not the accurate statement, maybe it is. You know, so everything that is supposed to be a fact or a kind of a technically accurate statement can always and should always be contested. Okay, so I'm just preparing you, you know, when we get to do these things, and hopefully it's going to look like a dialogue quite a bit, you know, I'm going to say, well, actually, that's not the best way to express it. So please try to prepare for this and don't feel like, oh, he just doesn't like me because I'm wearing glasses or some shit or other. You know, it's not that. You know, we're all beautiful beings. It's just that the brains can always develop a bit more. Okay? That's that, guys. I don't know about attendance. Did you take attendance this week with others? No. We'll probably start next week. Cool. So that's that. Thanks for your attention. I'm going to wrap up. Is anyone SU? We're going to have a pint, like a kind of meet together? Is there anyone? We'll do it next time. Whatever. You probably, it's still sunny outdoors. You wouldn't want to stay inside. Cool. So this has been recorded. I will upload and see you soon.